The morning was calm. The sound of birds filled the air as the soft breeze touched the leaves of the mango tree beside the narrow stream. Grace was walking home with a pot of water balanced neatly on her head. The water glistened under the early sun. It was a morning like every other, peaceful, simple, and quiet until she saw him. At first, she thought it was a sack someone had thrown by the roadside. But as she drew closer, she froze. A man, maybe in his early 30s, lay flat on the ground, half his body covered in dust, his shirt torn, his face bruised, and his lips pale. He looked like he hadn't eaten or bathed in days. Grace gasped softly and looked around. Some villagers were walking back from the stream too. She waved at them. "Please, come and help me," she shouted. One man looked in her direction and hissed, "Grace, leave that one oh. He may be a thief pretending to sleep." A woman carrying firewood stopped for a moment, glanced at the man, and walked away shaking her head. "People have no sense these days," the woman said. "Helping a stranger can bring trouble." Grace stood helplessly as everyone passed. Her heart pounded. The man wasn't moving. She dropped her pot beside him and knelt down slowly. His breathing was faint, but still there. She tried shaking him. "Sir? Can you hear me?" she said quietly. No answer. For a long moment, Grace just stared at him. "No," she whispered to herself, "I can't leave him here to die." She tore a piece from her wrapper and wiped the dirt from his face. His skin was warm, but his body weak. She stood up, looking at the long path that led home, then at the man lying before her. "I can't lift you," she murmured, "but I will try." Grace dragged him slowly, pausing every few steps to rest. Her bare feet sank into the soft soil as the morning sun rose higher. Sweat ran down her face, but she didn't stop. She was alone, struggling, yet determined. By the time she reached home, her legs were shaking. Her mother, Mandy, was outside sweeping. The moment she saw Grace dragging a strange man toward the house, she dropped her broom and shouted, "Grace, have you gone mad? Who is this?" "Mama, please," Grace said, panting. "I found him by the stream. He's unconscious." Nobody helped him. Her mother frowned deeply. "And so? Since when did you become a nurse?" "Take him back there." "Mama, he's dying. Please, at least let him rest first." Before she could finish, her mother's palm landed sharply on her cheek. Slap. "You've turned into a good Samaritan, ABI? You think life is a storybook? You don't know who he is. He might be a criminal." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "But, Mama." "No but. Return him now before people say my daughter is bringing strange men home." Grace bent her head in silence, holding back her tears. The man was still lying weakly on the ground. His face looked peaceful, almost innocent. She couldn't abandon him. So, when her mother entered the house angrily, Grace waited a moment then whispered softly, "I'll find another way." She wrapped the man's arm around her shoulder and dragged him again, this time toward the hut of an old herbalist who lived by the edge of the village. The man was heavy, but she didn't give up. When she reached the herbalist's hut, she knocked gently. The old man came out surprised. "Grace? Who is this?" "Please, Baba," she said, breathless. "I found him unconscious by the stream. My mother refused to let me bring him home. Please help me save him." The old man looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You have a good heart, my daughter. Leave him here. I'll do my best." Grace smiled weakly, relief washing over her tired face. She had done her part. She turned to leave, but looked back at the man one more time. Something about him felt special, like fate had just begun its work. The next morning came quietly, the kind of calm that makes a village feel half asleep. Grace woke early, her eyes still heavy from the long night. She hadn't told her mother where she had taken the unconscious man. She only said she was going to fetch firewood. Inside her heart, however, she knew she was going to check on him, the stranger whose face she couldn't stop thinking about. When she got to the herbalist's hut, the smell of herbs filled the air. Birds perched on the roof, chirping softly. The old herbalist, Baba Ekin, sat outside grinding leaves in a wooden mortar. "Good morning, Baba," Grace greeted respectfully. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Morning, my daughter. You came early. Your stranger is still alive, but he's weak. His body is fighting for strength." Grace's heart leapt. "Thank God he's alive," she said softly, her voice full of relief. Baba pointed to the small hut at the corner. "Go inside and see him, but don't disturb him too much." Grace walked slowly into the small hut. The man lay on a mat, wrapped in an old blanket. His hair was messy, his beard rough, and his face pale but peaceful. She knelt beside him, gently touching his hand. It was warm. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. "Please let him live." Every day after that, Grace came to the herbalist's hut to check on him. Sometimes she came with herbs, sometimes with porridge, sometimes with just prayers. The herbalist treated him with care, but his medicines cost money. Grace had none. So she decided to work on people's farms to pay for his treatment. Under the hot sun, she bent over the fields, planting and weeding. Her clothes were soaked with sweat, her hands rough from work. Some of the villagers mocked her. "Grace, who is this stranger you're suffering for?" one woman said. "Maybe he's a spirit. When he wakes, he'll vanish and leave you with empty pockets." Grace only smiled weakly. "If he lives, that's enough for me." Her mother, Mandy, noticed that Grace came home late and left early. "Where have you been going?" she asked one evening, her tone sharp. "To the herbalist's farm," Grace lied softly. "He needs help with work." "Her?" Mother eyed her suspiciously. "You're hiding something. I can see it in your eyes." Grace looked away. "Nothing, Mama. I'm fine." That night, when everyone slept, she sneaked out quietly and went to the hut again. The moonlight guided her path. She sat beside the man and watched him sleep. His chest rose and fell gently, and she found herself wondering what kind of life he had lived before this moment. Who was he? Why was he found near their stream, alone and broken? Days turned into weeks. The herbalist continued his treatments. Grace continued her labor. Her mother continued to complain. But Grace didn't care anymore. She had made up her mind to see the stranger through. One afternoon, as she was working on a farm not far from the stream, she heard the familiar voice of her mother. "So this is where you've been wasting your energy?" Mandy said, folding her arms. "You're slaving for a man you don't even know. I warned you, Grace. One day, you'll regret this." Grace wiped her sweat and looked at her mother calmly. "Mama, if I walk away from someone who needs help, how can I ask God to help me when I need it?" Her mother scoffed. "You think this man is a blessing? He will bring you shame. Mark my words." But Grace didn't argue. She simply turned back to her work. The truth was, she didn't understand her own actions either. All she knew was that every time she saw him breathe, her heart softened. That evening, she returned to the herbalist's hut with a small calabash of food. Baba Ikin was sitting by the fire, mixing herbs in a pot. "Baba, please, how is he today?" she asked. The old man smiled. "He's improving. He moved his fingers this morning. His strength is returning little by little. You should keep praying." Grace smiled with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Baba. I'll keep helping." She placed the food beside the mat and watched the man's face again. His breathing was stronger now. She sat there silently, feeling something stir in her heart, something she couldn't name yet. "Whoever you are," she whispered, "you're not dying. Not while I'm here." Outside, the moon shone gently on her face. It was as if fate itself was watching, smiling softly at the beginning of a bond neither Grace nor the stranger could yet understand. The morning came softly, and a golden light poured through the cracks of the hut. The air smelled of crushed herbs and the faint smoke from Baba Ikin's fire. Grace arrived early, as she always did. She had a small calabash of pap and roasted plantain in her hand, and her heart carried a quiet prayer on her lips. As she stepped into the small room, she froze. The man's fingers moved slightly. His eyelids fluttered. She blinked, thinking her eyes deceived her. But then, his chest rose higher, and with a weak groan, he opened his eyes. Grace gasped, the calabash almost falling from her hand. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. The man blinked several times. Confused, His eyes moved around the room, the thatched roof, the hanging herbs, the low wooden stool, before finally settling on her face. He frowned softly, trying to speak, but his voice was weak. "Where am I?" he managed to ask. Grace smiled through her tears. "You're safe. Please don't move too much. You've been unconscious for weeks." He stared at her, still trying to piece together where he was. "Who are you?" "My name is Grace," she said gently. "I found you lying near the stream. Everyone passed by, but I couldn't leave you there. So I brought you to Baba Ikin, the village herbalist. He's been treating you." The man's lips parted slowly. His voice came out in a whisper. "You helped me?" Grace nodded, still smiling. "Yes. I couldn't just watch you die." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to remember something painful. Then he whispered, "My name is Charles." "Charles," she repeated softly. "That's a good name." There was silence for a while. Only the sound of the burning herbs filled the air. Charles tried to sit up, but his body felt too heavy. Grace quickly supported him with her arm, helping him lean against the wall. His eyes met hers again, soft, confused, yet grateful. "You shouldn't have helped me," he murmured weakly. "It could have been dangerous." Grace shook her head. "Life itself is dangerous. But kindness isn't." Her words sank into him like warm water on dry soil. No one had ever said such a thing to him before. His eyes softened. "Thank you for saving me." Grace lowered her gaze shyly. "Don't thank me. Just get better. That's enough." As days passed, Charles began to regain strength. Grace continued visiting every morning and evening, bringing him food, water, and clean clothes. The herbalist treated his wounds and gave him herbal baths. Each day, Charles watched her more, her patience, her humility, her quiet laughter that filled the hut like music. One evening, as the sun began to set, Charles spoke again. "Grace," he said softly, "you've done more for me than anyone ever has." "Why? You don't even know who I am." Grace smiled gently. "When I saw you lying by the stream, something told me it was right to help you. I didn't need to know your name to do that. My heart wouldn't let me walk away." Charles looked at her deeply, his voice faint but sincere. "You have a heart that's pure. People like you are rare." Grace's cheeks warmed. "Don't flatter me. I'm just an ordinary village girl." He shook his head slowly. "No, you're not." That night, when she went home, she found her mother waiting by the door. Mandy's arms were folded, her eyes full of suspicion. "So you've been sneaking to the herbalist's place every day, eh? All for that stranger?" Grace sighed. "Mama, please don't start again." Her mother stepped closer. "Tell me, Grace, what if that man is a criminal? What if you're taking care of a thief?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Mama, if he was a thief, God would have shown me." "He's not. He's just lost." Her mother scoffed. "Lost? You'll be the one lost if you don't stop this nonsense." She turned and stormed inside, leaving Grace standing quietly under the moonlight. But Grace didn't stop. The next morning, she went back again. And when Charles saw her walk into the hut with her usual warm smile, his heart lifted. For the first time since his capture, since the darkness he had faced, he felt safe, not because of the herbs or the shelter, but because of the kindness in the eyes of the girl who refused to abandon him. He looked at her and whispered, "Grace, you've brought me back to life." And Grace, smiling softly as she placed his breakfast before him, replied, "Then live well, Charles, that's all the thanks I need." Days turned into weeks, and the man Grace once dragged from the stream was now walking slowly outside the herbalist's hut. His steps were weak but steady, and every time Grace saw him stand, her heart lifted like a bird set free. Baba Ikin would often smile when she came. "Your patient is stronger now, Grace," he'd say with a chuckle. "If not for you, that young man would have been buried by the stream." Grace would smile shyly and glance at Charles, who now helped sweep the compound to show gratitude. His beard was trimmed, his skin brighter, and though he still looked lean, there was strength returning to his frame. One afternoon, as the sun lay golden on the trees, Grace brought him food, boiled yam with palm oil and pepper. Charles smiled warmly when she entered. "You came again," he said softly. I'll keep coming until you're strong enough to chase me away, Grace teased. He laughed gently, the sound still weak but filled with life. That may take a while. Grace placed the food on a small stool. Eat first. You talk too much these days. Charles smiled and ate slowly. After a while, he sighed deeply. Grace, I owe you an explanation. You deserve to know who I am and what happened to me. Grace sat quietly, her hands resting on her knees. I'm listening. Charles looked down for a moment before speaking. My name is Charles Obi. I came to your village for a business inspection. My father sent me from the city to look at a land we wanted to buy near the river. That day, as I returned from the site, some men stopped my car. They had guns. They dragged me out and covered my face with a cloth. I tried to fight them, but there were too many. They hit me hard on the head and threw me into their van. Grace's eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. I thought that was the end, Charles continued, his voice low. They kept me in an old building for days. I didn't eat, I didn't drink. Then one night, police sirens sounded nearby. They panicked and ran. I tried to crawl out, but I was too weak. I must have wandered through the bushes until I reached your stream. After that, I remember nothing. Grace covered her mouth. Oh my God. He smiled faintly. And that's where you found me. You could have ignored me, like everyone else, but you didn't. You carried me. You saved me. Grace shook her head gently. I didn't save you, Charles. God did. I just obeyed my heart. He looked at her with gratitude. If only the world had more people like you, it would be a better place. They sat in silence for a while. The afternoon wind blew softly through the open window, carrying the smell of herbs and dust. Grace watched him, thinking how strange life could be, how one act of kindness could bring two strangers together. Later that evening, when she went home, her mother was waiting again, arms folded. Grace, where have you been? At Baba Ekin's, she replied quietly. With that man again? Mandy asked sharply. You've made yourself a servant to a stranger. Do you even know who he is? Grace lifted her chin. Yes, Mama. His name is Charles Obi. He was kidnapped on his way from the city. He's not a criminal. Her mother frowned. Kidnapped? Are you sure? Or is that what he told you to make you pity him more? It's the truth, Grace said softly. You should come and see him yourself. Mandy turned away angrily. I have no business with strangers. If anything happens to you, don't call me. Grace swallowed hard. Her mother's heart was firm as stone, but Grace knew one day she would understand. The next morning, Charles walked out of the hut for the first time without help. Grace stood nearby, smiling proudly. You're finally standing strong, she said happily. He looked at her and nodded. Because someone refused to give up on me. Grace laughed softly. Don't make me cry, please. Charles took a deep breath and looked around. The sky was clear, the world bright again. Grace, he said slowly, I need to go home. My father must think I'm dead. He must be worried. Grace's smile faded a little. You're leaving already? Yes, he said gently. But I won't go alone. I want you to come with me. I want my father to see the woman who gave me my life back. Grace froze. Me? Go with you to the city. Charles nodded with a small smile. Yes. You may not know it, Grace, but you've changed everything for me. You gave me hope when I had nothing left. My father must thank you himself. Grace's heart began to race. She didn't know whether to be afraid or excited. Her hands trembled slightly as she smiled shyly. If Baba Ekin agrees, then maybe I'll go. Charles smiled, his eyes warm. Then it settled. And in that quiet moment, under the gentle wind that blew from the trees, Grace didn't know that her life was about to take a turn that would shock the whole village, even her mother who once told her to return the stranger to the stream. The morning Charles decided to leave the village, the sky was bright and calm. The birds were singing as if they knew something special was about to happen. Grace stood outside Baba Ekin's hut, her heart beating fast. She had never traveled beyond the next village, yet here she was, about to go to the city with a man she had once found lying by the stream. Baba Ekin came out of the hut smiling. So, the prince is finally going home, he said teasingly. Charles laughed softly. Baba, you've been like a father to me. I won't forget your kindness. He brought out a small leather bag. Please, accept this as a thank you for all you did. The old man waved his hand. No need, my son. The girl you call Grace did everything. I only used my herbs. Grace smiled shyly and adjusted her wrapper. Baba, thank you for allowing me bring him here. He nodded slowly. You have a pure heart, my daughter. Go with him. Wherever this journey leads, never forget who you are. They both knelt, receiving his blessing before setting off. The journey to the city took hours. Grace sat quietly beside Charles in the car he had borrowed from a friend in the next town. The road stretched long before them, lined with green fields and dusty tracks. She watched the trees rush past and held the edge of her seat nervously. Charles looked at her and smiled. Are you frightened? A little, she admitted softly. I've never been this far from home. Don't worry, he said gently. You're safe with me. When they entered the city, Grace's eyes widened. She had never seen such tall buildings, such busy roads, such bright cars flashing everywhere. The horns, the people, the smell of roasted corn mixed with exhaust fumes, it all felt like another world. After a while, the car turned into a long road lined with guards and palm trees. At the end stood a magnificent compound, painted white and gold, with marble pillars and a large gate that glistened in the afternoon sun. Grace stared in shock. Where is this? Charles smiled faintly. Home. Her heart skipped. Home? You mean? He nodded before she could finish. Yes, Grace. I'm Prince Charles, son of King Collins of Arinta Kingdom. This is the palace. Grace froze, unable to speak. Her hands trembled as she looked at him, then at the large gate. The guards bowed immediately when they saw him. Your Highness, they shouted, running forward. Charles nodded to them. Where is my father? He is inside, my prince, one of them said quickly, excitement in his voice. We thought you were gone forever. Grace's mouth parted slightly. She could hardly believe the man she had dragged from the dirt was standing there being saluted by guards. Charles turned to her, his eyes gentle. Grace, come with me. You saved my life. My father must meet you. She hesitated, her feet heavy. Prince Charles, I don't belong here. Look at me, my clothes, my hair. He smiled warmly. You belong wherever kindness lives, Grace. Don't be afraid. He reached out his hand, and slowly she placed hers in his. Together they walked through the grand gate into the palace. Inside, the atmosphere changed. The palace was filled with servants and golden decorations. A tall man wearing a royal robe hurried out as soon as he saw Charles. It was King Collins, his father. His eyes filled with tears. My son, he cried, running forward. Is this really you? Charles knelt before him, tears glistening. Father, it's me. I came back. The king lifted him up and embraced him tightly. I searched for you everywhere. I thought I had lost you forever. When they finally pulled apart, Charles turned and gently brought Grace forward. Father, he said softly, this is the woman who saved my life. I would have died if not for her. The king looked at Grace, astonished. You? You helped my son. Grace knelt quickly, trembling. Yes, your majesty. I found him by the stream and took him to a herbalist. I didn't know he was a prince. Tears gathered in the king's eyes. My daughter, may God bless you. You saved the light of my house. He helped her up and turned to the servants. Prepare a feast. The prince has returned. Drums began to beat from the courtyard and voices filled the air with joy. Grace stood there, overwhelmed, her heart pounding. Charles leaned closer and whispered, you see? You didn't help the wrong person. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. I didn't do it for reward, Charles. I just couldn't walk away. And that, he said gently, is exactly why you deserve everything good that will come. As the drums grew louder and the palace filled with celebration, Grace realized her life had changed forever from the girl by the stream to the woman who had unknowingly saved a prince. The next morning, the palace was alive with joy. The sound of drums echoed from one end to the other, and the air smelled of roasted meat and burning incense. Every corner of the royal compound glowed with life. Prince Charles had returned home safely, and the people rejoiced. But in the middle of all the celebrations stood Grace, still shy, still unsure. The clothes she wore were plain, her hair simple, yet she drew every eye that saw her. The servants whispered among themselves, "That's the girl who saved the prince. She doesn't look like a city woman." Still, imagine a village girl bringing back our heir. Grace didn't care about their whispers. She was just grateful Charles was alive. Later that day, the king sent for her. She entered the grand hall nervously, her hands clasped together. King Colin sat on his golden chair, his crown shining under the light. Beside him stood Queen Gloria, a woman of grace and wisdom. Charles was there too, smiling warmly at her. When Grace knelt before them, the king stood up. "Rise, my daughter," he said kindly. "You are no longer just Grace from the stream. You are the reason I smile again." Grace stood slowly, tears filling her eyes. "Your Majesty, I didn't do much. I only did what my heart told me." The king smiled. "And that's what makes it special. Many people saw my son lying there, but only you stopped. You gave life where others gave excuses." He turned to one of the palace guards. "Send messengers to Grace's village. Let them know she is safe and honored here. Prepare gifts for her family." Grace's heart jumped. "Please, Your Majesty, my mother didn't want me to help him. She'll be angry." The king chuckled softly. "Then let her anger turn to joy when she hears you saved a prince." By the next afternoon, 2 royal messengers arrived in Grace's village. They rode fine horses and carried baskets of gifts, cloth, rice, salt, and gold coins. The villagers gathered, shocked and curious. Mandy, Grace's mother, came out of her hut, her wrapper loosely tied, her face full of suspicion. "What is going on?" she asked. One of the messengers stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Madam Mandy, we come from Arinta Kingdom. Your daughter, Grace, saved our prince from death. The king himself sent us with these gifts." The crowd gasped. Some women covered their mouths in disbelief. "My Grace," Mandy stammered. "You mean Grace, my daughter?" "Yes, madam," the messenger said proudly. "She is with the king and the prince now. She is honored and well cared for." Mandy's knees grew weak. She sat down on the ground, speechless. The same villagers who once mocked Grace for helping a stranger began to talk loudly. So that man she carried home was a prince. Didn't we tell her to leave him? Grace has brought glory to her house." Mandy couldn't stop her tears. She remembered how she had slapped Grace, how she had called her foolish, how she had told her to return the man to the stream. Regret filled her heart like bitter water. One of the messengers handed her a letter. Mandy unfolded it with trembling hands. It was written in neat handwriting. "Dear Mama, don't be angry. I only followed my heart. The man I helped was not a criminal, he was a prince in trouble. I am fine now. The king and his son are kind to me. They send their greetings to you. I will visit home soon. Your daughter, Grace." By the time Mandy finished reading, tears had soaked the paper. The whole village gathered around her, celebrating. She saved a prince. She will never suffer again. God bless that girl. That night, Mandy couldn't sleep. She sat outside, staring at the stars. "Grace, my child," she whispered. "I called you foolish, but you were wiser than me. Forgive me." Back in the palace, Grace stood on the balcony, looking at the moon. The garden lights shimmered across the compound. Prince Charles walked quietly toward her. "You miss home," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "A little. My mother must be worried." He nodded. The messengers should have reached her by now. Grace looked at him, her eyes gentle. "I hope she understands." Charles stepped closer. "She will. One day she'll see what I see in you." Grace lowered her gaze shyly. "And what do you see, my prince?" He smiled. "A heart too good for this world." She blushed, her heart fluttering. For the first time, she realized she was no longer the same village girl who fetched water by the stream. Fate had carried her into a new world. A world of royalty, gratitude, and love that was quietly blooming between her and the man she once saved. Days turned into weeks, and the palace grew used to seeing Grace around. Her simple beauty and calm spirit made her beloved among the workers. She never acted proud despite being treated like royalty. Every morning, she still helped the cooks in the kitchen, still swept her own room, and still spoke softly to everyone. Prince Charles watched her often. There was something about Grace that humbled him. He had met many women, beautiful, wealthy, polished, but none like her. She had no riches, no fancy speech, but her heart was pure. One afternoon, he found her sitting by the palace fountain, washing fruits. The water sparkled around her hands as she worked quietly. "Grace," he called softly. She looked up and smiled. "Your Highness," she greeted shyly. Charles chuckled. "How many times will I tell you to stop calling me that? Just call me Charles." She laughed gently. "I can't. It feels wrong." He came closer, kneeling beside her. "Then let me make it right." Grace looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Charles took a deep breath. "Grace, I've thought about this every day since I opened my eyes in that hut. You risked your life to save mine. You worked on farms to pay for my medicine. You had nothing, but you gave everything. I can't imagine my life without you now." Her heart began to race. "Prince Charles," she whispered. He continued, his voice sincere. "I don't just want to thank you. I want to honor you, love you, and spend the rest of my life with you." Grace froze, her hands trembling. "What are you saying?" Charles smiled gently. "I'm asking you to marry me, Grace. Not because you saved me, but because I've seen your heart, and I want it beside mine forever." For a moment, the world stood still. The sound of the fountain faded, the birds seemed to pause in the air. Grace stared at him, her eyes wide, tears gathering. "Me?" she whispered weakly. "Marry you? But I'm just a poor village girl. Your people will laugh. Your mother." Charles reached for her hand. "My mother already loves you. My father calls you his daughter. The kingdom will honor you because I do. You're not poor anymore, Grace. You're priceless." Her tears fell freely now. "I don't know what to say." He smiled. "Say yes." She covered her face, shaking her head in disbelief. "This feels like a dream." "Then let's make it real," he said softly. Grace lowered her hands and looked at him through her tears. His eyes were kind, steady, and true. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Charles. I'll marry you." He laughed joyfully and pulled her into a warm embrace. The palace maids nearby, who had been watching from afar, began to cheer. Word spread quickly through the palace. The prince had proposed. That evening, the king summoned them both to the royal hall. When Grace knelt before him, he raised his hand. "No more kneeling," he said warmly. "You are part of this family now." Grace's eyes filled again. "Your Majesty, I don't deserve." The king interrupted gently. "You deserve everything good in this life, my daughter. You saved what money could not buy, my only child." He turned to the guards. "Prepare for a royal announcement. My son will wed the woman who gave him life." By the next morning, the news had reached Grace's village. The people gathered in the square, shouting in excitement. "Grace is marrying the prince." The same girl her mother called foolish. Who knew her kindness would lift her this high? Mandy sat quietly in front of her house, listening. Her heart was full of both shame and pride. She remembered every harsh word she had spoken, every warning she had shouted. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "My daughter," she whispered, "you proved me wrong. You listened to your heart and found a destiny I couldn't see." She looked at the road that led to the palace and smiled faintly. "God bless you, Grace." Back in the palace, Grace stood before her mirror, dressed in a simple but beautiful gown given to her by the queen. Her heart was peaceful. When Charles entered, he looked at her and smiled deeply. "You're glowing." She blushed softly. "I still can't believe this is happening." He took her hands gently. "Believe it. You saved me once by the stream, but you keep saving me every day with your love, your calmness, your faith." Grace looked up at him with tears shining in her eyes. "And you saved me too, Charles. From a life that didn't believe kindness could matter." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Then we saved each other." Outside, the drums began to beat again, echoing across the royal courtyard. The kingdom was ready for the wedding of the century, the union of a prince and a village girl whose heart had changed fate itself. The palace glowed that morning. Every corner shimmered with colors of joy, white, gold, and soft pink. The drums beat slowly at first, then louder, calling people from far and near. Flowers hung from the pillars, dancers twirled, and the sound of laughter filled the air. It was the day the whole kingdom had been waiting for, the day Prince Charles would marry the girl who saved his life. Grace stood quietly in her room as maids dressed her. The queen herself adjusted the veil on her head. "You remind me of myself when I was young," Queen Gloria said softly. "But your heart, Grace, your heart is something special." Grace smiled shyly. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I still don't know why all this is happening to me." The queen touched her cheek gently. "Because when others walked away, you stayed. God rewards a pure heart in his own time." Grace nodded slowly, her eyes misty. The memory of that morning by the stream flashed before her, the unconscious man, the villagers passing without care, her mother's slap, and her decision to help anyway. That one act had changed everything. In the grand hall, King Collins stood proudly beside his son, who looked dashing in a royal blue outfit with golden embroidery. The drums quieted when Grace entered. Every eye turned to her. She looked radiant yet humble, her beauty glowing from within. Charles's smile deepened as he watched her walk down the aisle. When she reached him, he whispered, "You look like the answer to a prayer." Grace smiled faintly, her heart fluttering. "And you look like everything I never dreamed could be real." The priest's voice echoed across the hall. "This is not just the joining of two hearts, but the joining of faith and destiny. Let he who was once lost now find joy in the woman who found him." When they exchanged vows, the hall erupted in cheers. The king's eyes filled with tears as he blessed them. "Grace," he said solemnly, "you came into our lives like light breaking through darkness. From this day, you are not just my son's wife, but my daughter, my pride, and the hope of this kingdom." The crowd applauded as Charles gently lifted Grace's veil and kissed her forehead. The celebration began. Music, dancing, and laughter filled the palace grounds. Far away in the village, Mandy sat by the window of her small hut. The sound of celebration drums carried faintly through the wind. Her heart was heavy yet full. She had refused to go when the messengers invited her. Shame held her back. But later that evening, a royal carriage stopped in front of her house. Grace stepped down, still dressed in her elegant attire, her face glowing. "Mama," she called softly. Mandy turned slowly, her hands trembling. "Grace." Tears filled both their eyes. Grace knelt before her mother and held her hands. "Mama, please don't cry. I came for your blessing." Mandy's tears spilled freely. "My daughter, I wronged you. I called you foolish when you were wise. I spoke with anger when I should have spoken with love. Please forgive me." Grace smiled gently. "Mama, I forgave you long ago. I understood your fear. You didn't want me hurt. But sometimes, doing the right thing means walking through fear." Mandy held her tightly, sobbing. "You're a blessing, Grace. May God bless the day you followed your heart." Charles stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Mama Mandy, your daughter saved my life. I will honor her forever. Please, don't see me as a prince, see me as your son." The old woman wiped her tears, smiling weakly. "Then you're already my son." The villagers gathered around, clapping joyfully. The same people who once mocked Grace now sang praises for her. "One good turn deserves another," they shouted. "Grace has brought glory to this land." That night, back in the palace, the couple stood on the balcony, looking at the stars. The cool breeze swept through the air, carrying the soft sounds of distant drums. Grace leaned against Charles, whispering, "It still feels like a dream." Charles smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "It's real, Grace. You turned compassion into destiny. You gave me life, and I'll spend mine making sure yours shines." She smiled softly, her heart full. "If I could go back, I'd still help you by that stream." He kissed her forehead. "And I'd still choose to fall there. For you to find me." They both laughed quietly as the night sky glittered above them. The kingdom would tell their story for generations, the story of Grace, the girl who followed her heart, saved a prince, and taught the world that kindness is never wasted.